Metal Memory covers the development of the Ferrari 250 Testarossa, and an exciting true mystery centered around a particular Testarossa, 0718. It's written by automotive historian Scott Callan, my dad. And this is my dad's model, which we'll be restoring today. A 250 Testarossa model built by Burago, looking a little worse for wear. Although the Burago model suffers from some quality issues, it has good bones and is a perfect candidate for restoration and improvement. The most notable flaw with the Burago model is the enormous gaps between the upper and lower body, which will be the focus of this modeling project. The first step is disassembly. The model itself is only held together with 4 screws in the bottom of the frame. The rest are just pieces that snap tight into place. This particular model had sat on his desk in the sun for almost 30 years and had extensive UV damage to the plastic, so a lot of the parts as I removed them broke. For this build, I used an industrial paint stripper known as Jazzco. You must be very careful to avoid chemical burns, and you need very heavy gloves to use this. The nitrile gloves I'm using in this video were not sufficient and quickly ate through the gloves. I had to change them quite a bit before I bought myself a better quality pair of gloves. Luckily, the paint actually almost explodes off the model itself. It strips in seconds and almost completely, which was very satisfying. A word of warning when using Jazzco, the chemical burn almost happens immediately, so run to the sink and start thoroughly scrubbing the area with cold soapy water until you're no longer burning. Once I was finished stripping the paint off both halves of the body shell, I gave it a bath in some cold, soapy water to stop the chemical process and get all the paint flakes off. In the end, the car stripped completely and rather beautifully. I almost didn't paint it once I saw it, but I knew I had to do some body work to be able to fill those seams. Because so much of the original plastic on the model had disintegrated, I decided to buy a second one off of eBay and use that as a parts car. Luckily, the parts car arrived in pristine condition, and as an additional bonus, it also came with the correct color interior that my dad wanted to have in the car in the first place. In this nice overview, you can see just how many of the parts broke during disassembly, the UV damaged plastic simply shattering in my hands as I attempted carefully to undo each one of the press fittings that holds the model components in place. Now it's time for the body to receive its first coat of paint. That way I can assess where to fill and sand the rest of this model. Since I was away on vacation, I wanted to keep it as simple as possible and keep the parts list as short as possible. So in this case I'm using Rust-Oleum silver paint, which went on absolutely beautifully. The only modeling supplies I decided to send to myself were paints and adhesives, some of the filler material for the model bodywork, a few brushes, and an X-Acto knife. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Eventually, the entire car would be individually sprayed with flat coat to make it more durable for future handling. After everything was sealed with flat coat, the complex reassembly process began. I carefully combined the best parts from both models for the final assembly, carefully painting and weathering them as I went along. One of the more unusual features of this Burago model is that the car has to essentially be completely reassembled before you can finish the bodywork on the outside, so the engine, transmission, and interior all had to be installed and then carefully masked for paint before I finished. Keeping the bodywork as simple but as effective as possible, I chose a very limited number of tools to keep this approachable for your average modeler. I have Tamiya Mr. Surfacer 1000, Vallejo plastic putty, a chisel blade X-Acto knife, and a variety of automotive wet-dry sandpaper you can get from any auto parts supply store or hardware store. The main mission of the bodywork was to be able to completely and seamlessly fill the main gap between the two large body castings to make it look like the original 250 Testarossa hand-hammered aluminum bodies. The first operation is putting on a rather thick layer of the Vallejo plastic putty and allowing it to dry overnight. Then I came in with my flat-bladed chisel and also finished up with some sandpaper to give it a smooth texture and ready for the next coat of paint and the next coat of sanding and the next coat of paint. After 3 or 4 coats of sanding and painting, I managed to get the body completely filled to a point where it looks realistic and beautiful. Here you can see my painting technique honed in industrial design school as I gently dust the model with fresh paint, making for a very light but a very consistent and even coat over the model. It was then time for a rather exciting part, the final coat of silver paint. Luckily I had a gorgeous afternoon to be able to spray the model and managed to capture a rather fascinating array of angles of it glittering in the light. Rather looks like a flying car without its wheels, doesn't it? Reassembly was pretty straightforward, the only issue being that the press fitting for the knockoff wheel hubs was a little tight. It might be careful if you ever have a chance to take these Buragos apart, that you be very careful when doing so. As Adam Savage points out, there's few things more satisfying than taking off fresh masking tape on a beautifully painted model. Finally, Dad requested the exhaust system be painted black to better offset the beautiful silver color of the model. It ended up working beautifully. Then I finally carefully press fit the windshield pieces into place, and we were done. I let the resident photographer and automotive historian handle the photo shoot. Dad was absolutely thrilled with his model coming to life with a brand new coat of paint and some weathering. You can check out his book at velocitygroup.net, and I look forward to seeing you again soon on the Interurban Era.